I got started when found a friend of mine had a lathe. Actually, that lathe over there in the corner was in his grandfather's woodshed out in the backyard. The woodshed was falling apart and all the stuff was getting rusty, and I told him, convinced him that I should at least get his lathe out of the weather. And he allowed me to store it in my basement for a few years before I finally got around to using it. And I taught myself how to turn wood. I sat in my shop for a while, and then I decided to attempt to make tops. And I made tops for Christmas, made like 20 some odd tops, 23, 25 tops. They came out rather badly, but it was fun, you know, and I got into it. And then turning green wood, you start turning green wood and you're throwing shavings all over the place, and that's just a blast. And that sucks most of us into it. Actually, part of my reason for getting into using the lathe was to try to figure out if I could make the Cryptex Tantalus. So this piece, this is what got me going. This is probably like 2006 I made my first one of these. And it was inspired by the book, The Da Vinci Code. It's called a Cryptex Tantalus because I like the idea of the locking box in the Da Vinci Code, which is called a cryptex. And I told my wife that I wanted to make one out of wood. So there we go. So the word is catalyst. And you open it up and you keep your best scotch in there. Or you keep a fine bottle of wine or whatever you like. And I had made the first locking mechanical box, the Da Vinci Code Cryptex Tantalus, and I figured, well, as long as I'm making locking boxes and everybody else is making bowls, I might as well keep making locking boxes, and that way people will know me as a locking box maker. So from the locking boxes, I went to, actually I made a bunch of them and did pretty well with that. And then I had a long break doing software engineering where I was working incredible hours, 60, 50, 70-hour weeks for a year and a half. And I did almost nothing wood turning wise. And you know, during that time, I had all these ideas that were more artistic or wood art as opposed to functional. And when that job stopped, I took the opportunity to really start pursuing that. And that was sort of the beginning of the stuff embedded in wax or stuff embedded in ice. This piece came out of a board, a big solid block of wood. And this is kind of laid out how it was. So imagine this has all been cut into lots and lots of layers of veneer. So originally this block of wood was about that thick. So you do that, you slice it up, you sand it, you get it so it's all uniform thickness, and then I tape it back together in its original orientation. I ended up taking a section, a square section about that big out of the center. So then it had, a square block stack. From that, cut a round stack. So now, this is gone. So there's a whole stack of them that are like that. Then I cut the center out, and you end up with, of course it's not here because it's buried in wax, you end up with a stack of discs, basically. So here's 4 little verticals glued in. The next layer would have the verticals glued in between, so it alternates back and forth, and then you squish the whole thing down, and that creates the up and down motion in it when you do it, and that gets steamed. Once that's done, then it gets glued again. While it's compressed together, you soak it with glue, and it really holds it all together. And at that point, you have a blank that's basically a cylinder that's kind of compressed and has the structure. And that's what's inside that can right now. So now the trick is going to be to get this to release from the bucket. I've always been really independent and playful. My mother was a special ed teacher, and my dad tinkered like crazy. Certainly artistic stuff was never discouraged. I don't have an art background at all. I've never taken art courses of any form or not. But the vast majority of my youth was spent making things in my dad's shop. And they were always crazy ideas that seldom came out the way I wanted them to. So there you go. You can kind of see that's the blank that's in there. Fortunately, this one is much smaller than the form, so there's a lot of extra wax around there. Sometimes when they're really big, what happens is once I let them loose like that, the wax on the outside has gotten really soft, so you got to wait for the whole thing to cool off again and get hard again. Because the whole trick is the wax is supporting the structure that you couldn't normally turn. I used to get into trouble for playing with the candle on the dining room table because I would sit there and use my fingernails and bend it. And I mean, this is just, all kids do this. But it was bad enough that my mom actually gave me a wormy candle for Christmas one year as a joke when I was doing this a lot. So I actually got this candle that she had just totally mangled up the way I kept mangling up her candles. When I came up with the idea, it's like, it's one of those things that is wide open. There's a million different ways to play around with this. It's not so much about, the process itself is one thing, but what the interesting part is what structures you end up using. It just opens up this whole world of stuff that you can turn that you wouldn't be able to turn any other way. To me, making this stuff, one of the huge rewards of making this stuff is that it has the same sort of characteristics as the software engineering work that I've done for 30 years. But it's very real and it requires no explanation. I can hand you a piece that I've made that came from my imagination, and you can understand it and appreciate it, and I don't have to describe it at all. I don't have to tell you where it came from. I mean, there are aspects of where that came from that are interesting, but to be able to hand something you created to somebody and have them be able to just get it, that's amazingly powerful. To me, it's a really neat way of coming at it to actually make your own structures rather than rely on the wood itself to provide the structure for you. But I need to establish all the way around that I've cut down to the actual wood. In other words, obviously the whole thing has to be round when I'm done. So right here you can see I'm not quite touching the wood yet. I wouldn't really call it wood turning, I'd call it wood art. There's that piece downstairs that I told you that I was working on that's very much non-turned. That's a big step for me in that it's an incredibly, it's a pretty personal expression. I mean, this work started, I got to this work trying to create something that was going to look entirely different, and this looks nothing like what I intended to make. At the end, when you melt the wax away, it's quite magical, and that's the fun part. I have to pay the rent, I have to pay the mortgage, so wood turning art in general does not support lifestyles that most of us have come to end up with. I mean, I really enjoy doing this, and if I could do it at least half the time, I would. At this point, the economy is bad enough that I'm taking the software engineering when I can get it, and I'm doing the wood turning to keep myself from going crazy. Here we go. You want the light? It's better in the light. Still got a fair amount of wax on it that has to come off. I like the inside a lot. Normally the insides are not that interesting. People who come up and say, speaking of themselves, people see my work and say, oh, I'm not nearly that creative, or I'm just not creative. And that just, it drives me nuts when somebody says that. I think everybody has the ability to be incredibly creative, and we just stifle ourselves.